It's so easy to start something and then forget why you started it and then just keep running it forever. And maybe you're thinking, well, everybody else does it this way. I don't really know how else to do it. And we're all guilty of this to some degree. We start something with an intention, and then even though we're not getting the result we want, we just keep running the system over and over and over, and then we wonder why we're not getting the results that we want. Podcast Growth Nation, today for episode number 150, a little milestone here over at PGU, is it time to revisit your strategy? We were in group coaching on Tuesday, so I'm actually recording this on Friday before it launches. I'm behind schedule, but on Tuesday we were in our group coaching connection session. So we have 12 calls total, 6 of them are coaching sessions and 6 of them are connection sessions. And in the connection session, we were celebrating a lot of the attendees, a lot of the people in group coaching, because they had started doing solo episodes again. Now, here's the details. Most of the people in this group coaching program are coaches. For the most part, I think almost everybody is. So one of the first things I said was, look, if you're doing your podcast because at some point you want to get clients, you most likely should do more solo episodes. A lot of them had started doing guest interviews because that's the way you're supposed to do it. They just kept doing it. They kept doing it. They kept doing it. And maybe they got to the place where they wondered why it wasn't working the way that they wanted. So I went on a podcast last week and I sent a follow-up email. Hey, I'd love to hop on a podcast breakthrough session. Person's doing good stuff in the world. We got along really, really well. And he responded back and gave me some info on what he does and his coaching and all that stuff. So he said that he makes anywhere from $60,000 to $120,000 per client he works with on a yearly basis. Well, awesome. Good for you. That's a good amount of money. And so I think he's doing 3 episodes a week, all guest interviews. And in the notes, he wrote, one of the things I'm doing the podcast for is for lead gen. I want to help more people. I want to coach more people. I want to work with more people. Cool. When we do the podcast breakthrough session, I most likely will be pushing him to do solo episodes. Because here's the thing. If he had a very, very dialed in process where I got an email the day after I was on the podcast that said, hey, Kev, I really appreciate you coming on. Here's everything. Here are the assets. Here's the clips. Bada bing, bada boom. Also, I'd love to offer you a session, or here's a PDF, or here's a book, whatever. Then he would be doing lead gen. That didn't happen. Now, maybe I'm not an ideal client. There's a lot of things there. But I think he's fallen into the trap of thinking that if I want to get clients from my podcast, the best way to do that is to do guest interviews. And I still don't think that's correct. It's easier now to be a guest. There's a bunch of platforms that help hosts get guests, but it also helps somebody like a guest get on other podcasts. It doesn't mean they're necessarily qualified. It doesn't mean they have the money to work with you. It doesn't mean a lot of stuff. There's a lot of behind the scenes stuff that we don't see from these guests. So that's something really, really common. And I think this happens with a lot of things. It's not just this strategy. Maybe it's the social media strategy. One of the most common things I see is people say, yeah, it's not working. If it's not working, it's time to change it. Just because it's not working, it doesn't mean it can't work in a different way. It can't work in a different direction. The strategy isn't working. We have to try a new strategy. And that's essentially what we're talking about today. We're talking about if you started your podcast with a certain intention, if you started your podcast with a certain strategy, and that strategy isn't working, it doesn't mean you can't win. It doesn't mean you can't win in a way that you want. It just means that either the strategy is incorrect, it hasn't been long enough, you're not practicing the strategy in the right way. I mean, there's a lot of things that could be going wrong. Some of the common traps that I think people get stuck in with this is it seems like everybody is doing this, right? A lot of the big shows, quote unquote, have guests on. Yes, but a lot of the big shows make money in different ways than you and I make money. They make money through ads, sponsorships, affiliates, all of that stuff. Yes, you can do that. It's just hard. I think it's much harder to do that than it is to connect with your audience and then potentially find clients that way. So a common trap is, well, everybody else is doing it this way. That's how I'm going to do it. Yes, understandable. Same. We did the same thing. The problem is you're essentially highlighting the guest more than you're highlighting yourself. So let's do this as an example. If you have a podcast about podcasts and you have me on and you ask me questions and we have a really good conversation and then we get to the end and you say, hey, if you resonated with what Kev said, here's the link to everything. The people are going to reach out to me maybe more than they reach out to you. Now, I appreciate the fact that you want to highlight me. I appreciate the fact that you want to lift me up. I really do. But not at the expense of your bank account and not at the expense of your wallet. I don't want that to happen for you. So that's one of the most common issues is, yeah, you have a guest on, and if you're a really good, gracious host, you're going to highlight your guest and you're going to lift the guest above yourself. But you're also going to tell your audience that you should go find that person and work with that person, and that can be dangerous. Now, I'm not saying to be scarce and never have somebody on your podcast who does the same thing as you. I'm not saying that. But what if we had the thought that the reason we're going to have guests on is for growth? So guests is for growth, solos is for dollars. What if we did it that way? Oh, I have a really good opportunity to have this guest on. This guest hasn't done a lot of podcasts. They have a pretty big audience. I will get an influx of new people. Awesome. And then I'll do a solo episode solving the problems that those people have. And then the call to action will be something within my business, within my universe. Boom. You could rinse and repeat that forever. What I find is most people do one or the other and very rarely both. So they start from a place of doing guest episodes and they almost never go to solos, or they start from a place of solo episodes and they almost never go to guests. And you're missing out on potential on both of those sides. I do think one of the best ways to grow is to have guests on, because you will get exposure to new audiences. I think one of the best ways, probably the best way to make money for most of us is going to be doing solo episodes, because you're going to be solving problems, call to action. There's more flexibility with the solo episodes, right? Now, if you said to me, I want to do ads, sponsorships, affiliates, that's the way I want to do it, then I would spend all of your time just hammering messages to potentially big guests. Cool. You can run that forever. Conversion rate's going to be low, but you can just send 100 messages a week and somebody will come on and rinse and repeat that for long enough. But I don't think that's the way most of us are going to win. I don't think that's the way most of us are going to win. As an example, we have a client on YouTube over the last 28 days. I think they have 1.8 million views on YouTube. And I think that equates to like $11,000. Now, that's a good amount of money. And I'm not saying that's not a good amount of money, but that's 1.8 million views. They're doing 3 videos a week. We edit their videos, we edit there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes. There's a lot of social media stuff happening, 7 posts a week. There's a lot going on. It's taken them years to get to that point. A lot of podcasts, a lot of YouTube channels, a lot of content creators, unfortunately, can't last that long. And again, what percentage of people are getting 1.8 to 2 million views per month? It's a very small amount, right? The other part of this is if YouTube decides, you know what, we're only going to pay 50% of what we said we're going to pay on ads, and we're going to change that $10,000 to $11,000 goes down to $5,000 to $5,500. You're not really in control of that. So that is potentially dangerous. Okay. So common trap number 1, this is what everybody does. Everybody has guests on. That's the way to do it. Completely understandable. But I would suggest revisiting that strategy, especially if the strategy is to make money. Second thing, well, I'm talking directly to somebody, so that means there's somebody in front of me who I could potentially work with. Yes, and very, very rarely does a guest end up a client. There is something about the energetics of you're having me on and you're highlighting me. I don't know. Things get weird. I don't know how to explain it, but things can get weird. unless you're really good at sales, unless you have a really good solution, it's really hard to do that. So we had a bunch of guests on, and most of these guests didn't have podcasts. And I was like, oh, that's a really good opportunity. They're all good at podcasting. They all have great messages and they all have expertise. I'll just help them with their podcasts. I think we ended up getting like maybe 3 clients out of 100 and something. I wasn't nearly as good at sales. I didn't really understand this like I do today. So yeah, things could have been different, but I don't think that ever would have been a sustainable strategy. Maybe it's different for you. I'm not saying it can't work. I'm just saying there's certain levels of guests. Like if you get like an A-level guest, or let's say like a B-level guest, they're probably not going to end up working with you because they probably know more than you do about the thing that they came on for. That's where things get wonky. That's where things get a little bit challenging, is if you're having somebody on because they know something so well, you can't necessarily add value to them in a way that they would want to pay for, unless you have like a different offer, right? So that's a whole nother thing. But I think that's the common thought is, well, I'm talking directly to someone, so it makes sense that I could end up working with this person. Yeah, same. I definitely thought that for a long time. I just think there's something energetic about, I'm a guest on your podcast, you're highlighting me, you're sharing my accolades. It's very hard to reset the energy of that relationship. I don't fully know what it means. I don't fully know how to explain it, but that's something that we saw. It takes a very, very humble person to be on your podcast as a guest and then work with you. Unless the thing that you do is different than what they do. So I shared this example, I think, recently. This was somebody in the last group coaching. She said, I've had my hypnotherapy certification now for like 6 months and I haven't got any clients. And I said, okay, how many messages have you sent? And she said, well, I haven't sent any. And I said, okay, well, that's our problem. Right now, our strategy is we think people are just going to reach out to us. Cool, let's change that. I said, do you have like 5 people you've had on the podcast recently as guests that you feel like might be interested in working with you? And she said, yeah. I said, all right, I want you to just send them a message, offer them a free hypnotherapy breakthrough session and see what happens. And she said, okay, you think they'll say yes? And I said, I'm willing to bet somebody will. I think she ended up messaging 6 people and they all said yes. Now, does that mean they're going to end up being clients? No. But that does mean she's starting the process, and it does mean she kind of has a lead generation way now. Now, again, one of the things I said was just make sure you don't message any hypnotherapy coaches. That's not most likely how it's going to work, and that's okay. But a lot of these other people might have been like business coaches or fitness coaches or whatever it may be, entrepreneurs. Yeah, if they're an entrepreneur who is into personal development and growth, hypnotherapy might be something that they want to test the waters on. So that's a really good way to do it, right? And I think another one of the most common traps is we just forget. Like when you do something for so long, you just think, well, that's the way I do it. That's the way we do it here. That's the way we've always done it. And we forget that there are other ways to do it. Like just as an example, I've started doing these episodes with the lights off in the studio. I did 148 episodes, I think, with the lights on because that's how I've always done it. And that's how we do it at Next Level University. And I was like, I kind of want to switch it up. I want to do something a little bit different. PGU is different than NLU. I want to do something a little bit different. It was just automatic. And I know that's kind of a silly example, but I think it's an example that we can all deal with. Oh yeah, no, I've always had the camera there. Oh yeah, no, I've always used that mic. No, I've always had my setup here, right? Like I feel like that's a common thing for us. And I think growth is letting go of that and then trying something new. All right, let's give you the takeaways so you can get your booty on out of here. Takeaway number 1, you are literally highlighting somebody else. If you're having a guest on your podcast, you are literally highlighting somebody else, which is great. But if your goal is to work with your audience and you're having guests on that do similar work to you, I don't think that's going to really, really work. Not in the way that most people think. So that's 1. 2, very rarely is a guest going to be a client, especially if they're talking about something in alignment with you. If I'm a podcast producer and a podcaster and a podcast coach and blah, 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 and I go on a podcast, the odds of me, a podcast about podcasts, the odds of me working with that person are just not very high. We're doing something similar. Now, I think I try to be very open to stuff like that. I've done a bunch of podcast breakthrough sessions with podcast coaches, and I'm happy to share all the stuff. Whatever. There's plenty of opportunity for everybody to win and add value to people's lives. But if they said, "Oh yeah, we can do your audio editing and video editing," well, no, I don't. We have a team that does that. I don't need help with that. Or, well, I could really show you how to get bigger guests. Like we don't do guests, right? So it just isn't aligned, and it's not going to work in that specific example. But I'm not saying it can't work in others. But I just don't think it's probably the best lead gen. And then this is maybe the biggest takeaway. If the reason you're doing the podcast is because you're trying to get clients, lead generation, you would probably be better off doing solo episodes and then taking the time that it would take you to get guests on your show and then guesting on other podcasts. You'd probably be better off doing that. At least from my experience. Now, again, I know I'm a podcaster and I'm a podcast coach who's talking directly to podcasters, but I know a lot of people that have done similar stuff to this. Business coaches, fitness coaches. There's a lot of people that have a really strong proof of concept that when you go on a podcast, you build a meaningful relationship, you add value, you have something in terms of awareness that person doesn't, and you can help them achieve results that they don't have yet. That's a really good way to get the ball rolling. So I'm not trying to crap on having guests on. That is not my intention. But that strategy, I do believe, is going to be less and less and less fruitful for when it comes to getting clients. Unless you're doing solo episodes mixed with it. That is my thesis. That is my thesis. Because the conversion rate just isn't going to be super high depending on what you're doing. Another example, same YouTube channel we're working with, 1.7 or 1.8 million listens, views over the last month. They're doing a free event. They're doing a free webinar. And they have over 1,000 people that signed up. Now, I know what you're thinking. Holy crap, that's a lot of people. Just do the math. 1.8 million down to 1,000. No way all 1,000 show up. Probably be half that. Maybe half to 75%. So let's just say 700 people show up. Cool. Let's say they have an offer at the end of the webinar that cost money. How many people do you think are actually going to do it? 10% would be 70 people. I cannot imagine it's going to be 10%. It's just, that is a really, really, really high number. I'm guessing it'll probably be 3 to 5%, is my guess. It'll probably be 3 to 5%. So what is that? 35? Say 25 to 35 is my guess. We'll find out. I can report with details, but it's just the conversion. Like if you got 100,000 views, you might get 100 comments. It's just that conversion. So I'm thinking the same thing when it comes to, well, I'm just going to have a bunch of guests on, we'll grow a bunch, and then people will reach out. Yeah, it works less than it used to, and I think it's going to continue moving in that direction. I do. There's a lot of ways to get your problem solved. And podcasts are one of the reasons people listen, or podcasts are one of the things that people listen to when they want their problem solved. You might as well be the person that solves the problem. You might as well be. Right? I think that probably makes the most sense. And I think one of one of the other common missteps and where people get stuck is they do what's easier for them. And usually for a lot of people, what's easier is interviewing because there's somebody there to pitch and catch with. And I can attest to that for sure. I mean, I'm used to it now, but doing solos was definitely a challenge in the beginning, and now we've done 150, so it's okay. But there is no, if I want a sip of water, I probably just will wait because I'd rather just wait until I'm done the episode rather than having to cut it or you sit here and watch me do it. I don't know. So going back to the top, I think we start something and we just run it and we run it and we run it and we get more comfortable doing it. And as we get more comfortable, we say, okay, yeah, it's working. Yeah, it's working from a confidence perspective, but it might not be working from a results perspective. It might not be working from getting the thing that you want. So my challenge to everybody is, why don't we sit down and check out what our strategy is? Let's do that. Because if the strategy doesn't work, I don't want you to be the person who quits and says, well, I couldn't do it. The strategy just wasn't right. It just was the incorrect strategy. And that's okay. You know how many times I've had the incorrect strategy? All of the times almost. Because there's always a better strategy. And there's always a way to improve the strategy. So you're not alone in this. You are not alone. If you need help with your strategy, I will put my link in the show notes. Now, this is always weird for me because I talk about how I go on podcasts, I offer free podcast breakthrough sessions, and then people become clients. I'm telling you, that is organic. I'm not going to sell you on anything. I don't have a pitch deck. I don't have any of that. I just want to add value. If you say, what does it take to work with you? I will answer, but I don't push it, right? I don't want that to be the reason I hop on these calls. Does it help business? 1,000%. Is that the reason I do it? Yes, it is partially the reason I do it. Will I sell you on anything? No, I promise. And if I do, you can leave a negative review and say Kevin lied and sold me on something when I didn't want him to. So we'll have the link in the show notes for that. And then Podcast Growth Nation is up and running. We're doing 5 posts a week. We're back. We're doing it. If you're looking for a group of podcasters like you who want to grow and scale and monetize and improve and be the best podcasters they can be, that is a totally free group. And we'd love to have you in there. Questions, comments, concerns. Somebody asked about lighting the other day. We've had a lot of awesome questions in there. So I know sometimes podcasting can feel lonely. Maybe you don't have a lot of podcasters in your life. That group, I think there's 85 or 90 people right now, and that will continue to grow as we continue to grow together. I hope your strategy is working, and if it isn't working, you have a new one on deck that you can start to practice. And as always, keep on podcasting, keep on crushing it, and I will talk to you all next week.